Hello everyone, I am Jake Hildreth. I am here to talk to you about Active Directory certificate services and why it is probably vulnerable in your network. I am a recovering systems administrator. What does that mean? 2 months after I started working for Trimarc, I thought to myself, maybe I should stand up an Exchange server at my house. So that's the kind of guy I am. Been in the business for about 20 years. I started out tier 1 support for a cable modem provider. So this was the Windows ME era. So if you need to do an IP config refresh, an IP config renew, I'm your dude. Then I moved on to a security-focused consultancy. But back in 2003, 2004, that meant like, do you have a firewall? Do you have antivirus? You're probably good. And then since then, I moved on to being a network administrator for a small municipality. And that meant I was responsible for anything with a wire, a chip, a screen, gobbledygook on that screen. I had to know it, and that is really where I cut my teeth in Active Directory. When I joined on, no one was really administering the Active Directory, and I then kind of took it upon myself to figure it out. About a year ago then, I saw a tweet from one Sean Metcalf about, if you're in ops and you want to move into security, get at me. And I did. And a couple months later, I was hired by Trimarc. So now I am an Active Directory security subject matter expert. And I do perform AD assessments on all sizes of companies. The smallest one I've personally done has been about 1,000 users. Largest one I've done is currently 100,000 users. So seen a lot. And yeah, most importantly though, I am a husband and a father, and that's pretty much what really defines me as a person. So what are we going to talk about today? First off, we're going to do a very high-level overview of PKI. I mean, super high level, because we don't have a week to talk about it, and I don't know that anyone that really cares that much about it. But then we're going to delve into what makes Microsoft's implementation of public key infrastructure, also known as Active Directory certificate services, what makes that special, we'll just say. And then we're going to delve into 3 of the most common misconfigurations that I've seen. We started assessing ADCS about 6 months ago. In that time, I've seen 10 different environments, approximately. And yeah, see what we've come across. And then 3 of the most dangerous misconfigurations that I've also encountered. And then we are going to talk about exactly how to remediate those issues, bring them into compliance so you don't need to worry anymore about your ADCS. And then we'll just review it all. And I'll be announcing a tool at that point. And before we go any further, I just want to talk about prior research that's been performed. Last year, the SpectreOps guys, Will and Lee, basically released I think it's a 140-page document talking about ADCS, all the holes involved, and a little bit on how to prevent or defend against things, but really not so much. So that's kind of what our focus is going to be here today, is going to be on how can you fix the holes quickly and easily that exist in your ADCS environment. We will primarily be talking about domain escalation, but we will also touch a little bit on persistence. So what is a PKI? It's generally used to confirm the authenticity identity of the entity that you are speaking to. Contrary to popular belief, it's not required for encryption, though it can be used as part of an encryption process. The way that I like to explain this is when you visit a website with an expired certificate and they say, do you trust this certificate? Yes, I do. Your connection is still encrypted, but you don't really know who you're talking to on the other side. So a PKI generally involves a mix of hardware, software, policies, procedures, templates, which we'll touch on a little bit later. And each of those has its own set of configuration issues that interact in really weird ways sometimes, just like anything in security. It's the interactions really that cause the issues here. And a bare minimum PKI is going to require only 3 things: a certificate of authority that's trusted by everybody, and then 2 parties that want to talk to each other but do not trust each other. So this is what it looks like here. Benny wants to talk to Melon. Melon wants to talk to Benny. Melon asks Benny, who are you? And Benny says, I'm Benny. Here's my certificate that proves who I am. It's signed by the CA that you trust. And Melon says, okay, I can trust you. But who are Benny and Melon? Because don't we normally talk about Alice and Bob in these? This is Benny. He is, if I had to describe a cat as a red team cat, this is the red team cat. I mean, this dude is always getting into places he's not supposed to be, testing my authority, et cetera, et cetera. This is Melon. And Melon is, he's a user. We'll just say that. So what makes ADCS so unique? Free, super easy to set up. I mean, next, finish, we're secure, we're moving on, we never need to do anything. Why are we even here, Jake? What's going on? Well, there is no security guidance during the deployment of ADCS. They don't explain what you're doing at all. And once you actually get it deployed, it's not really any better. The user interface is pretty terrible. A lot of the configuration options are hidden and not shown in the UI. If you make changes that are insecure, you may see a warning about it. You may not. And most importantly, Microsoft provides you like a bunch of templates, and those are secure by default. Like if you use a template as designed, especially if you upgrade the compatibility levels to like the latest possible, they're secure. I'm happy with them. But you can make an insecure modification with no real effort. So speaking of what is a template is just like a group of configurations that defines like who can assign, who can request a certificate, who needs to approve that certificate, what the certificate can be used for. So those are used to make your administration of certificate services much more efficient and repeatable, the things we like to see. Unfortunately, ADCS, says it right in the name, relies on Active Directory. And we all know that Active Directory is pretty easy to secure, right? And no one ever misconfigures it or maliciously modifies it. Nope, never. And all of the configuration for ADCS lives in AD. Yeah. Most importantly, though, certificates are not revoked when when their account when their password is changed. You go in, a user is compromised, you change their password, you think everything's happy. If an attacker still has their certificate for that user that was compromised, they can continue to log in as that user until that certificate expires. Worst, it's everywhere. I mean, every environment that I have assessed since working with Trimarc has had some bit of ADCS that lives in their environment. And that's, just a side effect of being free and easy to set up. So I totally understand why, but this is kind of what you expect. This graphic explains what what you would expect to see from ADCS. A completely separate environment. Certificate services live one place, Active Directory lives another. But in reality, it looks much more like this. And that's really the problem here. Once you are able to use a certificate to get into an Active Directory environment, you then have earned the rights of that user and can continue to, you've got a foothold. You can do your lateral movement if possible. You can do your escalations where possible. For example, let's go back to Benny and Melon here. Benny compromises Melon's account by phishing, or it's probably tuna phishing actually, and then steals that password. Melon's IT staff recognizes that the account has been compromised and resets the password. Like I said, Benny can continue to log in as Melon until that certificate expires. This is particularly bad when the user that gets compromised was something like a former domain administrator or a former PKI administrator. And I'll dig into that a little bit in one of my most common configurations. So just before we move on though, PKI is hard to secure. AD is hard. And then combining them, it's just, we're still discovering new ways to attack this. So let's dig into the most common things that I've seen in the wild. Number one, insufficient auditing. I don't know why Microsoft chooses this, but ADCS auditing is not enabled by default. So many different packages that they do this with, and I just don't understand it. And if you have multiple CAs in your environment, this setting must be enabled individually on each CA. So what that means in reality is you've got 7 CAs and 6 of them have auditing enabled. That 7th one is the one that attackers are going to hit. And they will be able to see that quite easily, that auditing is not enabled. But thankfully, we can easily enable it via command line and script it. Another unfortunate thing is, depending on your usage of ADCS in your environment, it can be really noisy. I mean, there are tons and tons and tons of events created. And if you're only using it to, say, like, authenticate your DAs or something, no big deal. But if you're creating machine accounts or machine certificates and user certificates and VPN certificates, and you're going to have a tough time. So do not dig into, in this talk, about event IDs that you're going to want to track, but we've got a few. That being said, like I said, I've not seen this configured in any environment at all. So if it's not configured in your environment, please do not be ashamed. No judgment. Luckily, it's pretty easy to re-enable it. You can just go into the certification services, MMC, and enable auditing. Unfortunately, there's a little more to it, but oh yeah, speaking of scripted version, this is the scripted version. Super easy. You just gotta enable the auditing, restart the services. No big deal. But then you also need to enable certification services in group policy. This is one of the sub-policies or more specific policies, also called advanced auditing. that were released in Server 2008. This should be applied, I'd probably say put a GPO for this at your domain root or at the OU that holds all of your certificate authority hosts. And last but not least, you need to enforce advanced auditing. So in my role as an AD security assessor, I've seen multiple organizations that set up all their advanced auditing properly and then do not enforce the advanced auditing. If you do not enforce the advanced auditing, those advanced auditing settings do not apply. So if you're doing your advanced auditing properly, this step is not necessary. But if you are doing it or not, go ahead and get this going. Number 2, single tier architecture. What does that mean? So in a public key infrastructure, you can have a root CA that is the root of all of your trusts in your entire environment. And in a default configuration, that's all you have. You've got your one root CA. It assigns some certificates to all your various entities in your network. And that's it. Unfortunately, this is not secure. This should not be used for production by Microsoft's guidance. But they don't mention that when you're doing your next finish at all. You have to dig into separate documentation in order to figure out that this is not production. And there is no implication, again, when you step through your next finish installation, there is no implication of what you are actually doing. Thankfully, the only places that I've found this have been smaller environments that do not have a dedicated security staff. I think once you bring in that first security guy, they say, nah, we're doing 2 tiers minimum. This is what it looks like. I mean, you've got your one certificate authority. It's handing out your certificates. But when your CA host is compromised, you're going to have to go around and touch every single device that has that CA as a trusted root for your environment. And unless you have like 3 machines in your network, that's going to be a pain. So yeah, let's remediate that. Let's actually take a step back first. Do you really need AD integrated PKI? Are you using it in that fashion? The few single tiers that I saw have an ADCS environment stood up, but they weren't using it. It was just sitting there, just with gaping holes in it. So really consider that. If you do decide, at least build a 2-tier PKI. We've got a root CA. We've got one or multiple CAs that actually issue certificates. 2 tiers is probably fine for most people, but if you've got especially a highly distributed environment, it's kind of difficult to do it with just 2 tiers, so 3 tiers might make more sense. That root CA should be completely disconnected from AD, which means it is built in standalone mode. Not domain joined, does not communicate with AD, lives offline generally, doesn't even have a network card installed, etc. The only time that you would bring that online is to create new intermediate CAs or to update the revocation list that the root CA is publishing. And then, of course, updating the OS occasionally. But you can do that on a much since it's offline and powered down, you can do that at a much slower pace than normal. And when possible, please use a HSM or a TPM or VTPM to protect those keys. That makes them much more difficult to grab. And then your subordinate CAs, the ones that actually issue certificates to your users and your computers, those will be in enterprise mode. Those will be Active Directory integrated. To go ahead and build a two-tier CA, I've done this. I've followed PeteNet's guidance, and start to finish, it's great. I might make some configuration changes now to it, but you know, for playing with, for starting your first two-tier PKI, it's perfect. And just so we can see what this looks like, we've got our root, our CA, and our other CA. Now, that first CA gets popped. It is compromised. Instead of having to go through and touch all of your computers, you can bring the root CA online and revoke the certificate that is assigned to the compromised CA. The other CA will pick up, do some work on behalf of the compromised one, and you don't have to go around to every single computer and touch them all. And I'm lazy, so that sounds better to me. Now we're going to get into things that are a little more Active Directory centric, I would say. And this non-standard ownership is fairly common. When I say fairly common, I mean I've seen it in every environment that we've tested. When an AD object is created, the creator becomes the owner. And that's important because an owner of an AD object can set any permissions on that object that they want, regardless of how the access control list is set. So that means even if they say, you know, authenticated users deny write, whatever. But if I own that object, own that template, I can modify it exactly to how I want it to be. So again, when I get compromised, guess what? You can go and find all of my templates that I created and modify them to your specifications, up to and including allowing yourself to request a certificate on behalf of your domain admin or your domain controller. The few places that I have seen this have been probably mid-size organizations that, you know, have implemented account tiering and never went back to clean up all of the objects that were created before their account tiering went into place. For example, in my lab, you know, Hildreth 1234 was formerly a domain administrator. Create some templates, gets them pushed out, and then a few years later, you know, Hildreth admin is created, and Hildreth 1234 still maintains control of this particular object. So Hildreth 1234 clicks on a phishing email about Mario Kart being released, and yeah, now the attacker owns that specific object. So pretty easy to fix, fortunately. We just need to reset your ownership to known safe owners, and domain admins, enterprise admins, the domain administrators group, if you've created some specific PKI admin groups for your environment, those are all perfect owners. What we prefer is definitely enterprise admins, and that is mainly because enterprise admins should be kept empty unless you're actually using it. So y'all are keeping your enterprise admins empty, correct? I do not believe you. So luckily, again, pretty easy to find. We look through and find We define what we want as our safe owners, and you can modify this to yourself. Oh, I am including all of these snippets on my GitHub, which I will link to again later. Probably get this posted on the Trimarc Hub. Got the approval from the boss. Sweet. Yeah, where you could go in and grab all of these snippets to find and remediate your own environment. So yeah, we just look through, we define who your safe owners are, and find all the objects in the public key services container that do not match that. In my lab, I had 6. If I have a small number like 6, I'm probably just going to go through and remediate those by hand. That shouldn't take too long. But if you're over that, that's probably my limit. Got some code here to go through and reset your all the ones with bad owners, reset all of those to domain admins. Pretty simple. So that wraps up the common misconfigurations. And just to review, that's no auditing, a single tier configuration, and non-standard ownership of those objects. Now we get to move into the fun stuff. And by fun stuff, I mean things that will take like 2 steps at worst, 1 step to compromise your domain. First one, kind of related to the last one, overly permissive ACLs. The problem with this one is that, or why I deem it more dangerous, is because typically, instead of it being a single user that is assigned these dangerous ACLs, it's more assigned to groups, which then obviously opens up the attack surface. Low privileged users should have no right access on anything in the public key services container. And really, the everyone group shouldn't be able to do anything in that container. And we'll go ahead and say, anonymous and yes too, because yeah. The few times that I have found this, it is related to a template that was created for testing and just never got cleaned up later. It's got the name of copy to web server test or user authentication dev or whatever, something like that. So obviously not in use, probably can just delete that one. But, so this is what it looks like. I mean, fairly simple here. I'm going to give you an example of how this would be attacked. First off, user attacks, compromises an admin's daily driver account, and then they go ahead and enumerate that container that I showed you, the PKS container. And they find a template created years ago that basically the template says, if I request a certificate using this template, I get it back in my name. But because your attacker has write access to that template, they can go ahead and modify that and say, I want to request a template or a certificate in the name of someone else. So I'm going to go ahead and request it as a domain admin. And like we discussed earlier, once you've got that domain admin cert, you've got domain admin until the certificate expires. Thankfully, again, pretty easy to find. We go through, we define who the safe users of these templates are. We define what some dangerous rights are that non-safe users, unsafe users, yeah, that's the word I want. Unsafe users should not have. And then we just kind of work through the entire container and find all the templates that match that configuration. In my lab, I only had a couple. Unfortunately, the code that I've given you as written will spit out things like your CA should not, or that your CA has rights over templates. Your CA should have rights. So you're going to want to go through this and just kind of manually clean up whatever is found in that code. And what that basically does is just takes and unchecks that write option for the unsafe users. Now we get into the really fun stuff, and by really fun I mean one step. This is one-step stuff. Like we discussed earlier, templates contain basically a set of configurations that define, who can request a ticket, or sorry, who can request a certificate, what it can be used for, who the certificate is for, and is approval required for the certificate to actually be created. Those last two are important because in many, many instances, these certificates are created where a user, just a standard user, can request a certificate on behalf of any other entity in the environment without any approval, up to and including domain admin and domain controller. And I have found this exact specification in 8 of the 10 environments that I have assessed. So it's out there, and yeah, it's just low-hanging fruit at this point. This is what it would look like if you were to actually dig into how the template is configured. Domain users can enroll. The template is used for client authentication. The requester can supply in the request an alternative name for the certificate, and no one is required to approve that certificate is good. Earlier, I was talking about bad user interface and bad guidance from Microsoft, and this is one of the more frustrating warnings. If you set these 4 configurations, this is the warning you're going to get. Read that last sentence. Combining these certificate options may create a security risk and is not recommended. I don't know if they could soften that anymore. I mean, this is a security risk and should not be completed, is what I would rewrite that as. So how is this attacked? It's pretty similar to the last one here. User gets phished. Attacker scans the PKIS container. SpectreOps actually released a tool shortly after their talk last year called Certify that will do all this automated for you. There are a lot of built-in utilities, dsquery and get AD object, etc., that you can use without having to download and compile Certify on the box. But it will scan through and find all of the vulnerable templates for you. So once they find one that's vulnerable like this, what do? Request DA, of course. And if this one sounds familiar to y'all, Mandiant actually posted on Thursday about our good buddies APT29. Putting this one into use. So yeah, it's for real now. Thankfully, it's really easy to find. A little complex to fix depending on your specific situation, but still really easy to find. What we're doing here, we're just saying, I'm looking for certificates that that are used for client authentication and that can set a alternative name and that do not require approval. Again, in my lab, 3. No big deal. Go through and modify them as needed. The options that I like to do for remediating this, number 1, you could just go ahead and remove the ability for the enrollee to request a different name on their certificate. Unfortunately, there are some valid use cases where one entity will need to request on the behalf of another entity. So what I prefer to do instead, oh yeah, this is what it does. It changes supply and request to build from Active Directory information. So that way you cannot request an additional name. So the one that I prefer for remediation would be requiring manager approval. What this does is a user can, an entity can request a certificate on behalf of someone else. But when they do, someone will need to actually go into the certification services, MMC, and actually say, yes, I approve the certificate to be created. And yeah, it's a, just a nice little stopgap to prevent anything from being, privilege escalated without any knowledge. All that does, checks the box that says CA certificate manager approval. There are some other ways that you can resolve these. The number of authorized signatures. We can do changing who can enroll in the certificate to make it, a tighter group, et cetera. But these two solutions are pretty good. So now we move on to the last misconfiguration. So imagine we took misconfiguration number 2 and just assigned it to all the templates. Just said, all the templates, you can assign your own name, it's fine. Well, let me introduce you to the edit F attribute subject alt name 2 flag. This one basically, regardless of how the template is configured, you are able to assign an alternative name to the template. Manager approval will still take place, so if you've got manager approval on your certificates, cool. Unfortunately, manager approval really impacts a lot of workflows in things like computer certificates and user certificates that are used for day-to-day use. So yeah, like I said, previous issue, much worse. And much like the auditing, it's configured on every single CA separately. So again, you've got 7 CAs, 6 of them are configured properly. That 7th one is not. A quick scan through the network can find which ones are not configured properly, and all of an attacker's work can be targeted at that misconfigured CA, and you would never know. Thankfully, this is pretty rare. I've seen it in 2 environments, and the 2 that I saw it in were both environments where they were in the middle of moving from one PKI to another PKI. So thankfully, not a huge deal. In both cases, the solution was, okay, we're just going to speed up our decommissioning of these old CAs. This is what it looks like. It's a mess. I can't read that still. So how would you attack this? Much like the rest. Phish the user. If we just eliminate this part, we'd probably be good, but and then there's no real scanning required by the attacker. It's just request a certificate with an alternative name, get yourself DA. Simple as that. Unfortunately, there are certain environments and software packages that require this to be set. They're very rare anymore. But if you have this specific flag set on all of your CAs, disabling it is probably going to break stuff. So by all means, test. If it's only set on a subset, so you've got your 6 that have it properly set, and then your 7th has the flag set, you're probably going to be fine to just disable that flag and move on. But again, test. Can't say that enough. You know, you may have some weird configuration that I am not aware of, and that's totally fine. Super easy to find this if it's set. Run certutil, which is kind of the, you know, Swiss Army knife of old school certificate administration. If you run the specific command, it'll tell you exactly all the flags that are set and with a description. Unfortunately, it doesn't really explain a lot of what those flags do. But if you see this specific flag, be vigilant and go ahead and move on to unsetting it. So, yeah, just need to unset that flag. Again, because this is just a simple command, simple single command, super easy to script. Just need to find all your CAs and unset the flag. Not a huge deal. So that is pretty much it. So we're gonna do a little wrap up here. Active Directory certificate services is incredibly easy to set up, and I'm not gonna lie, it's very useful. I mean, you know, if you need to do VPN authentication or machine authentication or smart cards, and there's just a lot of things that it can be used for. But it is so easy to screw up right now. And with Microsoft letting Active Directory kind of die on the vine, I don't foresee any changes in user interface to help. I don't foresee any changes in, you know, making it harder to screw up your own configurations. So instead, let's just focus on remediating things. Like I said earlier, do you really need certificate services in? Are you only using 1 or 2 certificates in your entire environment? If so, outsource those. You know, plenty of third-party PKIs that you can implement that will serve that purpose for you. But if you're going to, move to a 2 or 3 tier PKI. If you already have ADCS, you're using it, you know that you need it, etc., get your auditing enabled immediately. You know, less than probably 5 minutes per CA to track down and fix. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to those 2 that I mentioned at the end. Those most dangerous ones should be pretty easy to fix. Once you do that, you're going to be a hell of a lot better off than you were, you know, prior. And then we're going to go ahead and fix up your access controls and your ownership. Once that's done, you're probably good. I say probably because who knows. And this is one, most importantly, you need to protect your CA hosts. Every environment that I've seen, the CA hosts are just living in some generic servers OU and don't really, you know, they've got some people that have permissions over them that shouldn't and that sort of thing. These are just as powerful as your domain controllers. Protect them like such, you know. Limit the logons to just domain admins or your PKI admins. Move it into a top level OU, which limits the amount of inheritance issues that you may run across. Make sure that the GPOs that you assign to that specific OU are completely separate from your domain controllers, are completely separate from your domain root, you know, just CA specific, we'll say that. And treat your PKI admins like tier 0 as well. I would go far enough to say that your PKI admins should be a completely separate set of users. Just like you've got your tiering for your domain admins and your from regular users, you should have PKI admins separate from domain admins, separate from regular user accounts. So I know it seems like a lot of work to kind of bring everything correct, and I often have this feeling. Thankfully, already working on putting a tool together called Locksmith that will look through your environment, find these well-known misconfigurations, and then either provide you a report where you can remediate them on your own, or provide you the code so you can, fix it specifically for your environment, or just fix it. Just easy button, boom. We'll do that. And if you would like to help out with coding Locksmith, by all means, go visit my GitHub. The code snippets that I showed you will all be available there, so you can start auditing your own environment. And then Locksmith currently has a README markdown file, so got a little work to go on there. And then feel free to email me. I love to talk AD security, and love to assess your AD if you really want me to. And then probably the best way to get a hold of me, honestly, is Twitter. So there I am, .. And yeah, it's very weird, but a little bit of InfoSec fun. And I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn as well, but probably won't get to it for a few days. And last of all, I just want to say thanks to Will Schrader and Lee Christensen and the rest of the PKI wizards that have provided the shoulders for me to stand on. I wouldn't know any of this stuff without them. Another thanks to Sean Metcalf and Brandon Colley, who reviewed all of my slides and made sure that my presentation flowed correctly. And the rest of the Trimarc team. We got Tyler and Daryl over there. And actually, everybody in Trimarc is super supportive, and everybody helped me out with my dress rehearsal. And then, of course, my wife for listening to me, and my daughter, because she actually helped me come up with that, the explanation with Melon and Benny. So, yeah, many thanks to her. And, resources for if you want to dig in a little deeper. I highly recommend reading Certified Pre-Owned. It is dense, but it will change your certificate services world. I don't know. That's all we got. Any questions?
Machine identities, like STEP and things like that. How does that play into ADCS security? Because you can't turn on enrollment management and stuff like that.
Say that again? I didn't hear the beginning of it.
Machine identities. Like for a computer going using STEP, background certificate.
Okay.
Have you seen a lot of that? Have you seen that affecting, let's say, the templates and the template security that you put on?
I haven't dug into that at all, I must admit. Anybody else? No? Okay. I'm out.